Well, first, let me say that good for you that you're listening to this podcast, because podcasts are the thing that actually changed my life. I know. That's a little curveball, but you got on the book coach, and that's what made me think of it, because really I was not a podcast listener. As a matter of fact, I had a friend who listened to podcasts. I didn't even know what she was talking about. And I said to her, who are these people? Like, who are you listening to? You're not listening to famous people? No. Well, then what are you listening to? Who cares about that person? How do you even decide if you don't even know who they are? And she said, well, just type in what you're interested in. Type it in the search engine. I'm like, what search engine? So she showed me how to do it. And I thought, okay, let me try. And again, weight was a big issue. I'm like, okay, let me go with what I know, right? I type in weight. Of course, a bazillion things pop up. I start sampling. I land on someone. I'm like, I couldn't decide. Do I like her? Do I not like her? But enough to keep listening. And one day she had a guest on, and she acted like the guest was like, I don't know, the most famous person on earth. And I never heard of her. Yeah. And I never heard of her before. So I heard, oh, she has a podcast. So I hop on over to hers. Well, she was kind of like a mindset motivational coach. And so it was listening to her that got my wheels starting to think there's another way. Okay, so that's how I got started on the podcast. My book coach, I'm a few years into podcasts, and I'm listening to someone else having nothing to do with books. I think she was a business person, and she had this woman on. And she helped first-time authors get their message out into the world. And at that point, it had been a whisper in my ear, like everyone's like, you should write a book. You should write a book. Oh, you want to get this message across? Best ways to write a book. Now I don't write. But this woman's speaking to me through my car. And I'm listening to her, and I just felt such a connection to her. And not a connection like a lot of times I feel a connection like, oh, she sounds like me. Or, she's younger than I am. It was something about the way she was saying it. And I felt like I would be safe with her. I don't know how else to explain it, because I was so intimidated, because I'm not a writer. I like numbers, and this is going to be embarrassing, and I don't know how to do this. And I mean, every excuse in the book. And I felt like she wouldn't be a person to judge me. She would be a person who would help me. And I thought I at least have to, when I got to my office, I'm Googling her, and there was a link for a discovery call, and I booked it. And, as they say, the rest is history. And she was that and more. She really, really, really was and is an amazing person who just is really there to help people.
Okay, everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a guest with me today with a great pink phone, which we might talk about again because we just talked about it before we hit record. But my guest today is here to talk about probably one of the hardest things maybe for a young person to live through is taking care of a relative when you're young, as a young person, taking care of one of your relatives, and all the sacrifices and things have happened in the past. Debbie's here with me today. We're going to talk about her book, her story. There's so much goodness to share today. And Debbie, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
This is really great. When we talked, we had like a pre-interview chat to get to know each other. I left that conversation encouraged and excited to meet today and record together. And that's what I'm hoping today will mean for the listener as well as they join our conversation. You have so many great things to share, and you're so encouraging. So I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Can you tell everybody where you are in this great big world of ours?
Sure. I am in my little office in my downstairs in New Jersey.
Nice. And I can see out the window behind you, the trees, everything looks beautiful back there. It's great. We had a conversation around content creation, podcasts, promotion, all that stuff when we chatted. And you kind of took our conversation and shared it with somebody else. And there's a pink phone behind you. Can you explain to those that are watching what the significance of a pink phone is in the background and a little bit behind that as well? I'm interested.
Okay, absolutely, I can. So we had a conversation, yes, about podcasts, and you were sharing with me some of your great tips and tricks. And one of them was to have listeners leave a voice recording, which was fabulous. And then I was on a call with actually the woman who helped me. I don't want to say help me write the book because she didn't do any of the writing, but really inspire me and kind of give me a framework. So I'd call her my book coach. And I was sharing it with her. And she also recently started a podcast. And I told her about this. And I said, oh, you have to have this. This is just, right up your alley. And she loved it. And as we were talking, she said, instead of that, I almost visualize people picking up and calling the Maybe I Can hotline. And that hotline is a retro, which to me, it's not retro, but I guess it is a retro pink phone because pink is my jam. Everything I have is in pink and I'm always wearing pink. Actually, today I'm not, which is funny. Luckily, this is audio only, but I'm usually in pink. And so I went right out and ordered myself a pink phone. And it makes me smile every time that I look at it.
See, and connecting with your audience, hearing back from them, having a conversation is great. I love anytime you can interact with people. And I think one thing as authors, one thing I hear quite often is that there's not that two-way communication, especially during the writing process, where you're writing this book, you're putting it out there in the world, and you're wondering if it's going to land, if it's going to connect with people. Can you talk a little bit about your writing journey? And did that seem familiar to you? Did you kind of feel like you're writing to an empty room in a sense? You're not really sure who your audience was?
So, the first thing is envision who do you want your audience to be?
Right.
And I had a vision of a certain particular person, even though it could be, a variety of people. And when I was writing, clearly I knew other people were going to be reading it, but I don't think that really hit home until I went to record the audiobook, which I recorded myself in a studio. And I went into a little soundproof room myself. And there were two young guys, young to me, maybe 30, I doubt it, on the other side, and I couldn't see them. And as I was reading a story one day, I thought, oh, this is very personal, which it's a memoir. The whole thing is personal. But there was something about this particular chapter that made me realize, oh my goodness, they're hearing what I'm saying. And when I opened up the door and I looked at them, I felt like these two guys just had like an insight into my soul. And even though that was my intent, it landed very differently. And maybe it was because of that particular audience where I felt super exposed.
Yeah.
But their reaction was so positive that it calmed me down and made me realize, hey, this is why you're doing it in the first place. But I don't think that I really realized, oh my goodness, like now that it's coming out, I'm thinking everybody that I know is going to know not every detail of my life, but, the highlights and what I was thinking. And, that leaves you in a pretty vulnerable place.
What an interesting perspective to be looking into the eyes of your listener, your reader, the people interacting with your story and seeing them face to face. That's can be unnerving, but also maybe exhilarating in the sense that you have a chance to get some reaction as well. That's unique. I love that. It's a great story.
Thank you. Yeah. Believe me, I'm looking forward to the book actually being launched and hearing from other people. Part of the editing process was to have beta readers. So readers who just read it and kind of gave some feedback on what did you think about the story in general and, what kind of things should I add and take away? And obviously, everybody has their own opinion. I think I got about 12 people to give me feedback, which was super helpful. And so those are the only people other than these two gentlemen who've read it to date.
Wow.
So looking forward to getting feedback from the broader audience.
Amazing. So let's talk about the name of the book and the release date for the book. Can you fill us in on that as well?
Sure. So it's called On Second Thought, Maybe I Can, and it releases on August 9th, 2023.
Wow. So is there like a pre-order available for people, or is it on that date?
Right now, I don't believe there's going to be a pre-order.
Okay.
There might be a digital download pre-order a few days before.
Okay. And we usually do this at the end of the podcast, but as far as people following you and following the progress of the book and the release and everything and connecting with you, where is the best place for people to be in touch with you and follow the journey?
You know what? The easiest place is always to go directly to my website because all the social media links and everything is there. And it's just DebbieRWeiss.com. You got to get that R in there because otherwise you're going to go to, I think, a realtor somewhere in California.
Well, you could end up buying a house, but hey, let's buy the book. That's what we're here for. Okay, now let's jump over and talk a little bit about your personal story, because again, as we talked about at the beginning of the episode, that your story is quite unique in the circumstances around caregiving and taking care of a loved one from an early age yourself, and this. When I think of your story and our conversation, I think of someone who was kind of thrust into a life of selfless care for others, like putting yourself last and putting somebody else first, and your commitment there. Can you talk a little bit about your story and take us back and share a little bit about that?
Sure. So the day after I graduated from high school, my father, who was a few days shy of 46 years old, had a massive stroke that he survived. And the doctor said they didn't really know how he survived, but he did, luckily. And he was permanently disabled from that moment on. At that point, for the first year or so, he was paralyzed. The stroke affected the left side of his body, so it didn't really affect his speech too much, or his cognitive, although it was obvious he was not the same person. And that was one of the reasons that he was just unable to work and concentrate. And so it was, a couple months before I was supposed to go off to college for the first time. And I have a younger brother who's 4 years younger. So he was just turning 14 at the time. And my parents separated soon and then divorced while I was in college. And my college journey actually jumped all over the place, really because of my dad. I did not want to leave him. Back then, everything looks so different now. We're talking 1981. He was in the hospital for 2 months from the time he had the stroke. And he came home days before I left. And I was always daddy's little girl. And I was so heartbroken. And I just knew I was the one person who would be the most loving and be able to take care of him. But yet I didn't want to give up my, this experience of going off to college, even though I was petrified because I don't want to say I was shy, but if I didn't know you, I was shy. I was very insecure, very low self-worth. And so I was very nervous about it. And I wound up going, and long story short, I never stayed. I was there for maybe 2.5 months and wound up dropping out, not getting a credit from that particular school, coming home and living at home, attending a different university as a commuter in order to take care of my father. So I was home. I would be there when he had physical therapy. The physical therapist would give me the exercises because he couldn't move himself. So I would have to, exercise his leg, his arms. And I even helped him to take a shower while putting on a bathing suit. So, he wasn't exposed. And that's what I did for 1.5 years. I went to school, I worked part-time, and I took care of my dad. And probably in the spring of my sophomore year, I thought, oh boy, I've sacrificed a lot. Now that I was a little more mature, I did not want to miss out on the college opportunity or experience. And I wound up transferring to yet a third university away for the last 2 years. And while I was there, my parents did officially divorce, and my mom found a place for my dad to live. So he was taken care of, except, they didn't take care of his doctor's appointments and his, food shopping and, all of that kind of stuff, even though he got meals. And from that moment on, he lived for, 30 years from the time he had the stroke. And for those 27 years or whatever it was, I was his person. I did it all for him.
Well, when you graduate high school, you kind of have dreams, hopes, wishes, goals. You want to see the world. You want to do life. You want to have fun. You want to do all the things that all your cohorts and fellow students are doing. But you're thrust into adulthood and responsibility and accountability. You're not free just to go out and do something when everyone else can go. And that's got to take a toll on you, even though you were not, like you said, not as active socially. That's how I relate. I'm that person as well. I much rather stay home and just do my thing. And I'm not really into the big crowd thing and partying. That's not me. But even then, I would still want the option to be with my friends, do things. It doesn't sound like that was an option for you. It seems like your life kind of stopped as far as social life, and your friends' lives kind of carried on. Was that tough for you?
I mean, my social life didn't stop. It was curtailed, and it was, I think like you said, all of them were having this carefree time in their lives. Even as I moved on into my 20s, I mean, that was even a better time, right? For people, everyone's first earning money and you're getting this kind of independence and freedom and living on your own. And I had to worry about, I have to get here for my dad's doctor's appointment. And in my mid-20s, my father met someone at this independent living facility who was actually a gold digger, thought my father had money, which he didn't, wound up moving him out of the independent living facility, which had been so difficult for my mother to find, and verbally abusing him. And at 25, I was 25, I had to learn how to get him divorced. I lived in New York. I'm from New York originally. So
Wow.
I was in New York. He happened to be in New Jersey because that was the only place my mom could find. So I would have to go from where I lived in New York to him in New Jersey to pick him up, to take him to a lawyer in New Jersey, which thank goodness with the help of my aunt, I had to find. And I didn't even have a boyfriend, and I was learning how to get divorced.
Hey, yeah. So right there, you're doing things that other people aren't doing. And at the same time, how did you find time for yourself in all this? Was that something that was a priority for you in this moment, or was that something you had to kind of put away for that time?
I think at that time, I started to grow resentful. I started to feel put upon. Poor me. Yeah. I think when it all first happened, I felt important. Like maybe this was finally my purpose, right? I'm going to step out of the shadows because my dad needs me. And maybe I can't speak up on my own behalf, but on his, I feel like I have no choice. So I think actually looking back, I didn't realize this then, it empowered me. But after a while, it became burdensome, and he was difficult. I mean, I loved him with all my heart, but anybody who knew him, especially after he had the stroke, he was difficult.
Yeah.
And it wore on me. And I think that I found time to do things for myself only because I had to. And when I did, it felt like I had to have that time alone. It was almost like I needed that release of stress. So I did, because like I said, luckily, it wasn't like he was living with me. Mm-hmm. He was in another location. It was just that 24/7, he was on my mind. And whenever he needed something, luckily, when it first started, we didn't have call waiting. because he would get busy signals and he couldn't get through to me, but because he would call me not once, not twice, sometimes 10 times a day.
So from his perspective, one day everything is just like normal. My daughter's graduating high school. I'm working. Life is great. And then things change for him. Did he communicate to you in those early days any sense of guilt on his perspective? Because I'm a dad. I've got 3 grown children. I can't imagine them taking care of me in that way. I personally would feel like it's my fault that you have to take care of me. Was there any kind of conversation around that in those early days?
I don't recall in those early days. I think, he was feeling the rug just got pulled out from under me. What happened to my life? I mean, when I look back and I think, he at 46, 47, under 50 years old was living in communities with people who were 80 plus. I mean, if he met someone who was 70, they were practically a baby.
Yeah.
And here he was not even 50. Like, these people were older than his parents. Imagine having to be thrust into that world. Imagine now, you're divorced and you're out of your house and you're living in this little apartment and you can't do things on your own. So I think that it took him a while to turn and look at it from my perspective, because he was dealing with so much on his own.
Right. Right. For people listening who are caregivers, who are living this right now, any words of encouragement, wisdom from your perspective that you can offer to them? Because they're listening. Maybe they're on a break from what they're normally doing, and they have this podcast going on in their ears, and they're just looking for some kind of encouragement to continue, to keep going. What would you say?
Well, one, no, you're not alone, because I think that I always felt, why me? Because the other people around me weren't faced with this situation. As I got older, and now, then I turned middle-aged, and more of us middle-aged people were dealing with older parents. Now they were understanding a little bit more. But before that, I felt like, oh my gosh, nobody else is dealing with this. It's only me. So just know that it's not. Let me just, before I answer the rest of that question, because I do have another thought, I did go from then, I was his caregiver, my dad, for 30 years. He died in 2011. And I have a 22-year-old son who at the age of 2 was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. And so we all know all parents are caregivers, for sure. The best and the biggest caregiver for life. But when you have a child with special needs, it takes it up to a whole other level. And then probably about 10 years ago, my husband's health started deteriorating. And it wasn't until the last 5 years that I'd say I really had to take care of him, but it was headed that way about 10 years ago. So I've been at this caregiving thing since I'm 17 and I'm going to be 60. What I realized a little too late was my life is actually more important than theirs. And it goes back to that airplane oxygen analogy, right?
Yeah.
You have got to take care of yourself first, because you're not going to be able to help them. And that's what happened. I can't tell you how many times I got burnt out or frustrated. And so then what would happen? I wouldn't want to do something for them. I was screaming at them. It wasn't their fault. I mean, obviously, we all know. Do you think my father wanted to be like that? Do you think that anybody that you're caring for would choose this? Of course not. But when your tank is empty, you just don't have it to give. And I wished I realized that. I used to think that that was selfish. And it's not. It is not. So that is the second part of my answer. Self-care is not selfish. It is mandatory. And if you feel that it's selfish, just think that you are actually doing something to help your loved one by taking care of yourself.
Great. Perfect advice. Because I know people that are dealing with this in their own home and in their own lives. And there's days when it's a fight to just do the basics because they're just overwhelmed. They are exhausted. They are emotionally spent. The tank is empty, as you said, and there's nothing to draw from. So you do need that time to recharge. Any advice on how to do that? How do you fill the tank? What do you do?
I think that's individual, whatever it is for you. Maybe it's spending time in nature. Maybe it's getting a massage. Maybe it's doing a hobby or something that you enjoy. I always found for me, exercise helped my mental health. It took me out of, now doing some kind of exercise I loved, by the way, not any exercise, because I got a whole laundry list of things I don't enjoy, but I knew what I did enjoy. And I needed that. I remember running out of my house several times where everyone was like screaming, no, you can't leave. You can't leave. It's like, oh, I'm leaving. I'll be back in an hour and a half. I'll be better. And so will you. Yeah. And that's always what happened. So find it, whatever it is that, fills you up. I mean, I had kind of like an aha moment when I turned 50. And I went away with some friends, and that was the first time that I had really gotten to do that. And things came up on that trip, things that I was enjoying, that I had to actually ask my friends, did I used to like this? And they couldn't even believe that I was asking that. And that's when I realized I lost myself. I didn't even know what I liked to do anymore. I couldn't even remember. So sometimes thinking back to, hey, what did I like as a kid? Maybe you're going to play jacks or hopscotch. I don't know. But, maybe there's some variation in adulthood. Maybe it is, picking up an love of art that you used to like to paint, or, whatever it is, just experiment, because just the experimenting itself is fun and exciting and self-care.
So there's a process of finding yourself again that you have to go through?
For me, I certainly did. I'm still on it. I think I'm finding myself for the first time. Not I think, I know I'm finding myself for the first time.
Okay, unpack that a little bit. Talk about that more.
Yeah, I mean, I think my whole identity was, what do I do? Debbie does the right thing. Oh, she takes care of everyone. She took care of this one. She took care of that one. She knows what to do. So good in a crisis. Oh, you're so strong. Oh, who asked? I didn't ask for this. And that was my identity. But is that what I wanted my identity to be? No. But I didn't know what I wanted my identity to be. And honestly, like I said, I am still on that journey. I do think that I went through all of this so that I am able to share my experiences and hopefully help other people. I do believe deep down that is my purpose and my passion, which I never knew. How I wind up doing it, I'm hoping through this book, through, speaking and to tell people they're not alone. And there's others out there who've been there, and there's another way. There's a better way. And so I thought that life happened to me, and life just happened to everyone the way it happened. And we have very little control. Yeah, you can decide, what do I want to be when I grow up? Where do I want to live? Some of those things. But the challenges and the circumstances were beyond our control. And I just felt that, I don't know what I did, but I got the short end of the stick. Someday, I just hope it'll change. I had no plan. I was just literally hoping, praying, wishing, whatever you want to call it. Until one day I realized, wait a second. I do have control. I have control over what I do every day. I have control over what I think, which that in itself was a newsflash to me. I just thought anything that came across this brain must be the real deal. I didn't realize I could be thinking thoughts that are untrue or not helpful.
Right.
And I learned when you change your thoughts, when you change your action and your behavior, you change your life regardless of the circumstances, because we all have circumstances. They're different. Yeah, some are worse than others. It doesn't really matter. It's how we respond to them that matters.
Right. Now let's jump into the book. What are you most excited about for people to read? And what are you a little bit uneasy about that people are going to read? Those two things. What kind of comes to mind when you hear that question?
Well, uneasy came to mind as soon as you said that, because that's the glaring answer. So the book is basically a bunch of stories of my life. And it starts with, okay, here's where I was a kid, and here's the things that happened that made me who I am today. And then here's what happened in the middle. And now, since I turned 50, here's what I've been learning. And so I had those stories mapped out. And, they were obviously stories about struggles, more than just caregiving, a whole plethora of things. And one story I omitted. And it was a really big area of my life that I kept secret, a struggle that I was secretive about. And I didn't have it in. And one day, actually, after meditating, I heard a voice that said, share your secrets. And I did. So it is a story about money. My first career was a CPA. My second career is an insurance agent. I'm a numbers girl. I'm supposed to be good with money. I can tell you what to do. I can, yes, I do know all the things, but that's not what I did. And I came up with a million excuses having a lot to do with my caregiving that I decided was the reason for my money troubles. I was telling myself that story instead of taking responsibility for my actions. And it got pretty bad. And I did not want to share that with anyone, because looking at looking in, nobody's going to know that. And now everyone I know is going to know it.
Wow.
And that's scary. But I felt that if I didn't share that, I wouldn't be reaching everyone else who is a closet money struggler too, right? Like, for whatever reason, 'cause weight is another one of my big struggles, but that's a little different. Everybody can see that. Nobody can necessarily see your money struggles.
Right.
And there's a shame that comes with that in society. And so I thought, you're not going to help anyone unless you expose yourself. So I did.
Wow.
So yeah, that I'm nervous about, but it's out there and it's going to happen, and it's happening for a reason. And maybe that's to help you, the listener, and maybe it's to help somebody else. So if it's to help someone else, share the podcast and the book, because they're not the only one. Yeah. So excited. I guess just excited to share my journey since I have, turned 50, and what I've done over the last 10 years and where I am, at this point now.
It's exciting to see this all come to fruition, and to actually have the book so close to release date at the time of our recording. As the book goes out into the world, what kind of doors are you hoping that open for you because of the book? What kind of opportunities might come for you that you're anticipating that having a book will do that for you?
So, like I said, I don't have the whole thing mapped out in my head, right? When I realized what had happened to me and what my message was, and the fact that there must be other people out there who didn't realize you have an option of how you want to live your life, I felt compelled to just tell anyone and everyone I can or could. And that was the reason for the book. So I think that the opportunities is to be exposed to more people, right? Have more people read my book, give me a chance to get in front of audiences where I can share more of my story and hopefully impact their lives as well. So any way that I can impact others in a positive way, that's what I'm looking to do.
So what goes along with the book? You have other things that you're doing as well to promote your message and build community?
So I do have a private Facebook group on, well, I said Facebook, so Facebook.
Yeah.
And you know what? TBD. I'm waiting to see, would it be helpful for people if I had a coaching program? I'm trying to think about the things that I enjoy and I find helpful. And my friends have called me a groupaholic. So they're like, you are such a joiner. And they say that in a mean way, in a derogatory way, because they're not joiners. But if I see, when I'm trying to lose weight, I have to go to Weight Watchers. I have to go to meetings. I have to be with other people who get it, who get how I'm feeling. I've been in a million support groups. I've been in family members of mental illness because I've dealt with that. I've been, for the stroke victims, whatever it is, I find that camaraderie and just speaking to people who get it. And so I'm kind of leaning in the direction of, well, if that's something that I find so useful, why wouldn't I want to give that to somebody else?
Right.
So I'm exploring that option. So keep checking back on my website.
Checking in for sure. I love it. Yeah. So as you're going through the author journey, as you're writing the book, was there any parts during the process that were particularly challenging for you, or that you found to be quite easy once you got into the process of writing? Because this is a whole new thing for you as well, right? So what did you learn about yourself as you went through the journey of writing the book?
So I never set out to write a book. I would have, bet $10 million. Even almost a year ago now, that I would not write a book. And, kind of listening to the internal whispers and being open to that led me down this path. And when I joined this writing group, because I'm a groupaholic, so I joined a writing group. Yeah. And it was 12 weeks. And it was like, if I do it, I do it. If I don't, I don't. Because when I joined the group, I had just found out that my husband had just received a terminal cancer diagnosis. So I didn't really think it was the opportune time to write a book. It actually turned out it couldn't have been a better time. So I had no idea what I was doing. I found the starting and the figuring out, how do I even start? I'm looking at a blank page. I just don't know. So through the group, it was helpful because we had a course along with it that kind of gave us the structure. I didn't even understand what's the difference between a memoir and an autobiography or I didn't understand the nuance. So to get that structure, it started to fall into place once I had an outline. And even when I knew the stories in my head, once I put them on paper, I said, okay, even though I moved the stories around, it doesn't matter what order. And it was difficult in the beginning because I was too hard on myself. I felt like whatever I had to write had to be perfect. And then I just realized, who cares? This is just literally regurgitating what's in your head and getting it on paper. And there's going to be a lot of editing done after this, at least get it out. And once I kind of gave myself permission to get rid of that perfectionist thing, it was easier. The other thing was I was under the impression, and here's another lie, your thoughts tell yourself, I have to write it in order. Well, why the heck do I have to write it in order? Who said who?
Yeah.
So some days I would sit down and I would look at what I was, the next story in the outline. I'd be like, I'm not feeling that today. But you know what? I might not be feeling the story in chapter 4, but I'm feeling 14. Let me just skip to 14. And that was really useful because then at least, you were coming from a place where you just felt like talking about that, or something spoke to you that day about that particular story.
Nice. It's a great way to look at that. And I like the idea of not being tied to a numerical order. That's smart. Talk about your connection with your book coach we talked about at the beginning of the episode. What is it What was that relationship like for you, and how did you mutually give value to each other in the process of talking with a book coach?
Well, first, let me say that good for you that you're listening to this podcast, because podcasts are the thing that actually changed my life.
Okay, wait a minute.
Yep. I know.
Okay.
I know. That's a little curveball, but you got on the book coach, and that's what made me think of it, because really listening to, I was not a podcast listener. As a matter of fact, I had a friend who listened to podcasts. I didn't even know what she was talking about. And I said to her, who are these people? Like, who are you listening to? You're not listening to famous people? No. Well, then what are you listening to? Who cares about that person? How do you even decide if you don't even know who they are? And she said, well, just type in what you're interested in. Type it in the search engine. I'm like, what search engine? So she showed me how to do it. And I thought, okay, let me try. And again, weight was a big issue. I'm like, okay, let me go with what I know, right? I type in weight. Of course, a bazillion things pop up. I start sampling. I land on someone. I'm like, I couldn't decide. Do I like her? Do I not like her? But enough to keep listening. And one day she had a guest on, and she acted like the guest was like, I don't know, the most famous person on earth. And I never heard of her. Yeah. And I never heard of her before. So I heard, oh, she has a podcast. So I hop on over to hers. Well, she was kind of like a mindset motivational coach. And so it was listening to her that got my wheels starting to think there's another way. Okay. So that's how I got started on the podcast. My book coach, I'm, a few years into podcasts, and I'm listening to someone else having nothing to do with books. I think she was a business person, and she had this woman on, and she helped first-time authors get their message out into the world. And at that point, it had been a whisper in my ear, like everyone's like, you should write a book. You should write a book. Oh, you want to get this message across? Best ways to write a book. Now, I don't write, but this woman speaking to me through my car. And I'm listening to her, and I just felt such a connection to her. And not a connection like a lot of times I feel a connection like, oh, she sounds like me, or, she's younger than I am. It was something about the way she was saying it. And I felt like I would be safe with her. I don't know how else to explain it, because I was so intimidated, because I'm not a writer. I like numbers, and this is going to be embarrassing, and I don't know how to do this. And I mean, every excuse in the book. And I felt like she wouldn't be a person to judge me. She would be a person who would help me. And I thought I at least have to, when I got to my office, I'm Googling her, and there was a link for a discovery call, and I booked it. And, as they say, the rest is history. And she was that and more. She really, really, really was and is an amazing person who just is really there to help people.
Amazing. Can we shout out her podcast? Can we promote
Absolutely.
her here? I would love to point people to her as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. She's called, I have to look. I know. Soul Writers Podcast. I think that's what it's called. But she's Lauren Eckert, Burning Soul Press, or Burning Soul Collective. And yes, I will give you that information. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll send more people her way. I love that. I love how you found trust in a voice. I have a person you hadn't seen really or done life with, but there's a connection there from a listener to a podcast. That's what it's all about, right?
Exactly.
It's building that community. And for somebody who's a joiner, like you say, to join in on that conversation and join into that podcast and feel accepted, feel part of the community. That's all of the things that you were talking about, but now in podcast format. So I love that.
She says, I'm going to write 20 more books. I told her, Lauren, you know how old I am, right? Can't we just say 2? 20 seems a little intimidating.
So have you told her that story about how you found her and what that means to her? What was her response?
Oh, I mean, how could she not be touched and moved? And, we have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful relationship. And she wound up being my hybrid publisher. And I'm still meet in her group every week, even though I'm currently, not writing the book, but I'm on a different part of this book journey now, right? It's just an interesting, the other side. I'm on the other side of it. And there's still a lot to go with the release and whatnot. And, I think the other women in the group, and it's a small group, which is actually one of the things that I like. The other women in the group feel the same way. When we get done for the week, it's like we all of us say, oh, I don't want to hang up. It's almost like this is our therapy, because when you write a book, even if it's a fiction book, you're still exposing yourself.
Yeah.
And you want to feel safe and accepted. And, it's just turned into this just beautiful, beautiful thing that I thought to myself, Lauren, I'm going to have to be part of your group like forever because I can't leave.
I love it. Well, let Lauren know that I'd love to have her on my podcast as well and celebrate this story, because that's amazing. That's really amazing to see how this is all falling into place for you and for Lauren and for the group. I love it. I love it. So that's another secret weapon. I think that authors listening should find that kind of group context community, so that you're not writing alone in your room by yourself and struggling through the process. Find some people who have done it. Find some people who are doing it, and work together as a group and build up that community. That's a great suggestion from your perspective, just as you share the story. I think many people should put that into place.
Yeah. Something else that was part of this whole community, and again, since I'm a new author, I didn't understand this at all, was a co-writing time, or writing sprints, or whatever they call it, where they'll say, okay, we're all going to get on Monday at 2 from 2 to 3, and we're going to write. And before I did it, I thought, well, we're all going to write one story? Like, what is going to happen? You basically log on together on Zoom. Hi, how are you? Good. Okay, I'm going to set a timer. What are you working on? Okay, I'll set the timer and see you in 50 minutes. And everyone turns off their camera. Everyone turns off their microphone. And there you are to write whatever you're working on. And then at the end of the 50 minutes, the timer goes off. You come back. How'd you do? And I thought, well, isn't this ridiculous? Like, I need to be on with these people. They're not doing anything for me, but they were doing something for me.
Great.
Because if I registered for that time and I didn't show up, they'd be like, Deb, what happened? You didn't, we missed you today. And I could have turned off the camera and I could have been, doing something completely different. They would never have known. But what purpose would that have served for me?
Right.
And I think there was some kind of strange community and accountability from just being online, even if we weren't seeing and looking at each other for the whole hour, and we were all writing. Who knew?
What a unique Zoom room.
Yes.
The
very
most
quiet,
boring Zoom room ever.
Yeah.
But I love the accountability. I love that you're not alone, and that you have an appointment to sit down, focus, write chapter 14 instead of chapter 4, do something. But the fact that you're together with a group of people all doing something similar, that's so wise. That's a great idea.
Yep. It's, I found out it's pretty common in the whole, author world, but like I said, who knew? When you don't know what you don't know, especially when you're trying something brand new.
Amazing. So when the book launches, in August, any plans around the date of the launch? Do you have anything special planned? Are you going to celebrate? Talk about the day of the book launch.
So yes, I do have a special celebration.
Good.
Very, very excited about it. I'm having an in-person cocktail party event that will also be streamed online.
Nice.
So everybody and anybody can watch. And my 22 and 20-year-old sons are going to be the MCs. Hopefully that'll all work out. And I'm going to give a 20 or 30-minute signature talk, and my brother is going to interview me and Q&A and, well, appetizers, online. You can't get the apps and drinks online. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But make your own and tune in. So I'm super excited about that day.
Amazing. And there'll be links to that on your website? People can
Absolutely.
Find it. Okay, good.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing a story of something that happened to you that you really had no control over, that you couldn't plan for, but you have served your family well, and you've served yourself well in the meantime. You've also carved out spots for yourself. And I think you're back to that whole talk about the oxygen mask in the airplane. That is something that we all need to really consciously put some effort behind as listeners to this podcast, as readers of your book, that we really do need to take care of ourselves. So thank you for sharing that. That's great. And again, let's share the website. Let's share where you're most active online and social media, where people can connect with you. More podcasters want to have you on as a guest. Where do we go? How do we do that?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to more conversations with you. So, yes, my website is Debbie, Debbie, the R. It stands for Robin. For years, I didn't want to tell anyone. Now you know it stands for Robin, and Weiss, WEISS.com. And I also launched a podcast. Maybe I can podcast. All the links are on there. And Instagram. I never thought in my life I'd be like one of these Instagram people, but I guess I am. So on Instagram, it's Debbie.R.Weiss. So love to connect and hear from you wherever and however.
Excellent. So if you're on Instagram, head over to Debbie's Instagram account, leave her a voice message. Let her know that you heard her on the podcast. To all my past guests, all 250 of you, go leave Debbie a message. Let her know that you heard her episode, and let's connect with each other. Let's support each other and build each other up. Let's look for opportunities to build community. And for those people who may feel alone in their situation, back to your earlier days with your father, it'd be so cool if somebody reached out and said, I feel you. I've lived something similar, and I'm just here to support you any way I can. And I think that's what people are going to get from the book. That's what people are going to get from you, just interacting with you and your podcast. And Debbie, thank you for putting this out into the world to help other people. You found your spot. And as a joiner myself, I love joining in on this conversation in your community. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you again. It's been great.
Awesome. Everyone, please go support Debbie and give her all the love, all that Living the Next Chapter love. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks for checking out Living the Next Chapter. Happy to have you here. And here at the end, I want to just put this shout out to authors listening. If you want to sell more books, if you want to build community, one of the best ways you can do that is by guesting on podcasts and or having your own podcast. So I have a podcast called the How to Podcast series, and I help people start podcasts. I also do editing. I also help with social media, website design. I do all those things in addition to being the host of this podcast and the 6 other podcasts that I do, including How to Podcast series. I think you would be the perfect person to start a podcast. I would love to help you. Head over to howtopodcast.ca, howtopodcast.ca. Reach out, let me know if you're interested in starting a podcast, and I want to work with you. Thanks for listening to Living the Next Chapter. Catch you on the next one. Take care.